2 weeks ago, the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk exposed a type of evil and demonic that usually isn't so public. I remember seeing a post on Facebook that said Charlie Kirk got shot. And for whatever reason, because of how desensitized I've been to this type of stuff, I thought it would be just like what happened to Trump, that he was shot at and shot towards, but not necessarily wounded by it. And then it got a text message of a tweet that showed a close-up video of it. And that image has scarred my brain since that day I saw it. It wasn't but a few days later where we started seeing posts from pastors that said, if your pastor doesn't talk about Charlie Kirk this Sunday, you should find a new church. And now a new standard of pastoral fidelity has been created. But the shadow side of all this is that there suddenly is a spike in church attendance nationally. People who have not been to church in years or ever has saw the evil of what happened on September 10th and thought, I should start attending on Sunday. We are hearing about posts of people coming to church and coming to faith directly because of the events that took place on that day. Today, we want to talk about the claim that if you don't talk about Charlie Kirk, you are a coward. But we also want to talk about the privilege that God is calling us as pastors of churches to step into as we're seeing a spike in our attendance. My name is Frank. This is Practically Pastoring. We exist to help you not do ministry alone. I'm here with Andrew, Tim, Delmar, and Jeff. And so, guys, I just want to go around the table or the show here and ask, what did the people of your congregation text you, call you, reach out to you, talk to you about in the days and weekend that followed the event that happened on September 10th?
I fielded a lot of personal texts of people who were actually mourning. Like, they were actually like, I don't even know this guy. I don't know why I'm upset. Even the same night he got killed, we had family ministry stuff at night. And I asked the students in the room, who's this impacted? And it was kind of odd for me. All of them, even I have a 12-year-old, they said they see them online. So it was definitely in their face. So a lot of the first takes I got was the first part of the grief cycle. And it's very unique when you find your entire church in the first part of the grief cycle.
Yeah, I think the most of my people did not know who he was. Almost nobody in my congregation knew who he was. I don't know if that's interesting demographic study on where I live in the country or what, but most people didn't know who he was, but had heard the news. And I got a few texts of like, oh my gosh, did you see this? This is terrible. I felt like I was more bothered by it than a lot of people that I was texting. So that was kind of interesting. Like I was pretty shook up. I was one of those people who got texted of the close-up video and then wished I hadn't looked at it. And so, you know, there was a few people who asked me some questions about like what I thought. And I mean, my response was pretty much like, this is horrific. But yeah, I didn't get a ton of like questions about it until maybe the next week. So that was kind of interesting for me.
The first wave for me was youth group parents because it happened on a Wednesday and we were about to have youth group, and I had things from parents, you know, we want to make sure that the kids aren't seeing this, to which I said, if your kid is in school, they've seen it already. There's no way that your kid hasn't seen this already. And so then, you know, we had parents wondering what was going to be addressed, how it was going to be addressed, and if their kids should come to youth group that night. I had one family who didn't come to youth group that night specifically because they're a bit more progressive in the church and they were already kind of hearing this type of conversation online and they didn't want that. And I had another family who they were kind of at home grieving as a family. So the whole spectrum politically, and the initial conversations I had the conversations were about kids seeing the video.
Yeah, I immediately heard from some of our young men at Lakeview. As you guys know, Charlie had quite the following of young men. And so like the first couple things I was hearing was, man, it feels like my older brother has been killed. I'm like, wow. Like I knew Charlie Kirk and knew his stuff. I just wasn't like I wasn't like a, you know, subscriber, follower, just knew it existed. So it really wasn't until my younger crowd started reaching out to me. I was like, oh, I guess I better like get to know this guy a little bit. So that's when I started really like watching a lot of the Charlie Kirk stuff to kind of get to know, so I could know how to respond to our young guys who really just needed a space to mourn. Kind of like what Dell said, like it was like a real state of mourning for these guys. And so I just wanted to be there and let them know that, hey, we're praying right alongside you, right alongside this tragedy, and for everyone impacted and affected. And then, and within a few days, I started getting more texts about, are we going to talk about this? And I guess we're going to kind of get into that in a second. But that was like the follow up after we're mourning. It was, hey, are we as a church family going to mention this at all on social media or at church?
I like Jeff. Like, I don't think I remember seeing his videos online. It's after his death. I feel like the algorithm has just been sending me so many more of his videos. I didn't actually have like any negative thoughts about Charlie. I actually thought he was one of the better like conservative pundits out there, especially because of how outspoken his faith was.
Frank, what's funny for me is like the only clips I would get of Kirk in my feed were from people that were more progressive leaning. So you got the ones that looked more like distasteful, I guess, to them. Yeah. So it got me thinking about like, the content structure style thing that we've talked about for corporate worship. I kind of was thinking about that in terms of like his content. And it's like the content of his stuff, pretty good. For the most part, agree with almost all of it. Structure of it, I like it. I like you go into the colleges and, having open dialogue and stuff. But the style is where, some of his stuff makes some people feel uncomfortable. But it's interesting because that's just style. That's just the way he communicated. He was really good at punchlines. He was really good at, debating people. Maybe not formal debate, but in kind of the street style debate where you're one-on-one with someone. He was good at that. But, it's just interesting how you can have, and I saw a really good article about how you can have, like 3 different Charlie Kirks in your mind based on what you're seeing online. And how, kind of dangerous that is for us.
That's crazy. I without like having seen a ton of his stuff, like Jeff, seeing that video of up close, like really just messed me up. Like the only thing I can compare it to without kind of being graphic or gross was how I felt during 9/11. Like just like jarred of the evil that I just witnessed when in 10th grade, I think, my math teacher rolled a TV in our room and we watched the second plane hit the second tower. And I was like, what is going on? Like, it was just crazy. But one thing that's happened since then has been from some prominent pastors and other Christian voices saying, if you don't talk about Charlie Kirk on Sunday, you're a coward. Or if your pastor doesn't talk about Charlie Kirk on Sunday, you should leave that church. Faithfulness is not measured by whether you reference a specific news headline, but it's by rightly handling the word of God, exalting Christ, and shepherding your souls week after week. So what I want to ask you guys is, what do you think is specifically dangerous with this idea of you better mention the thing that I want to hear you say or else I'll leave kind of mentality?
I was thinking about this, and one of the things is that theologically, that's really bad ecclesiology. Really bad ecclesiology. This is not an issue of theological. This is not a close-handed theological issue. This is not. Maybe you could make an argument it's a gospel issue. Maybe. But talking about news events, yes. Is it possible that there are pastors who didn't talk about this because of cowardice? Yes, that is possible. It's also possible there are pastors who did talk about it because of cowardice, because I don't base what I say in the pulpit on what anyone else tells me to say. And that's not my calling. And it's one of the things my father-in-law was very strong with me about when I started going to ministry. He was talking about it in terms of the elders, like never let the elders get a hold of the pulpit is something he would tell me. And I think it's interesting in a situation like this because I am not a commentator on recent events. That's not my call. And so I think it reveals, or at least it can reveal, a really poor ecclesiology and a poor view of authority in the local church. That, for you to call for other pastors, for people to leave their pastor, shows a kind of weird, almost like view of yourself as like a pope, or that you have some influence over some other local church. And as Protestants, we just don't. I mean, I thought we don't believe that. So that's to me where it's pretty negative.
Yeah, I would kind of lean into what Jeff would say as well. I think we all definitely have certain opinions. And if you're listening now, you have an opinion on this too. And chances are we're probably in the same camp with it. But to put this hard mandate that if you're disqualified as a pastor and an elder if you didn't speak on Charlie Kirk, ultimately that runs a real quick skirt of outsourcing your discipleship to the world's cultures. And I think we got to be really careful for that, because I mean, come on, like, guys, let's talk about like how fast does our political and cultural like world cycle? You know, like right now, I woke up this morning watching thousands of people, Christians, getting killed in Nigeria. Am I supposed to preach on that this Sunday? And I think we got to really realize that people are outrage driven, and we got to be careful that we don't become clickbait pastors. You know, our main job is to point people toward Jesus. And if we're doing this in a healthy way, then sometimes there may be a space for that. But ultimately, we don't just outsource our preaching to the media cycle. If we do that, then we really can't be faithful to the text. So that doesn't mean that you cannot expositorily handle it, which we may talk about later. But our primary responsibility is to the text, and then it's to our flock that we're shepherding.
I think I did feel some of that pressure. Yeah, I saw the stuff on Facebook from pastors calling other pastors. I got some texts from some Lakeview members that I love, just asking, hey, are we going to address this? But then I'm in a group chat with some area pastors, and it was like, hey guys, how are you guys handling this on Sunday? Here's what I'm going to say. And I thought, oh, well, that's really helpful. And so I didn't know if we were all just going to adopt that. Here we have this thing called the collective, and we're kind of a group of like-minded churches. And I was like, I'm good for this to be like a collective statement that we as local pastors kind of make together. So I told him, hey man, I'm good to just kind of tweak what you sent over to me. If we both want to say, very similar, close to the same thing, I'm so good with that. I think there's a lot of negatives around this too, though, because you're putting this pressure on pastors to have to say something before they've had time to pray or they've had time to adequately prepare. And maybe the bigger issue for me when I heard about, you should leave if your pastor didn't mention Charlie Kirk, it's like, well, like, shouldn't the focus always be Jesus? Like, no matter what, like that should always be the focus every single Sunday. Like that to me is a much bigger marker on, am I going to stay or leave this church? Like if Jesus is not proclaimed week in and week out, that's going to be a big deal for me. If a current event gets missed, I'm good to have a conversation with my pastor. Like, where are you at? Like, and like Jeff mentioned this, like he fielded calls from people and chatted with people, and like, I'm good with that. I don't think I have to have my voice heard on every topic that hits. Now, did I feel like, you know what, this impacted my people in a very personal way, and I do need to address this on Sunday? Yeah, I did feel like that. So we did do that. But do I like judge any other pastor for not? No, I think context matters a lot here.
I think if we are not careful, we blur the line between, pastoral wisdom or pastoral courage here and very, very partisan signaling and letting people know, hey, I'm on this side of the aisle. And if you're on this side of the aisle and you're a Christian, you should come here. That kind of terrifies me. That's not where I ever want to be. Just, a bit of my history. I was a poli-sci major as an undergrad before kind of surrendering fully to Jesus. And on my own, the carnal version of Andrew becomes someone who very, very much blurs the line between church and state and thinks that they're one.
To be fair, it's a very fun version.
It's a very fun version of Andrew, but he's kind of a jerk, and I don't like him very much. And so that's kind of a scary thought for me. The other thought is kind of similar to what Tim just said, is the church, the wider church in general, is not entitled to know my opinion on every single thing. And I don't conflate my opinion with the truth on everything. There are some things that I am studied up on, and not like saying like murder is wrong and horrific and political violence, there's not a place for it in our country. Sure. Absolutely. We can agree that that's truth. But to go into some of these deeper issues on 2 days notice and be like, hey, I'm going to rewrite a sermon about that, and what I'm going to say is the definitive statement on this matter, as opposed to, hey, I've been planning this sermon series for 6 weeks, a month, however long it's been, and I've been studying, And oh, by the way, my decade of vocational training has led me up to the point where I can make a statement and kind of be the expert on this one thing versus, hey, world, here's something that happened 2 days ago. Now gather around for the oracle to speak. That's disgusting. My opinion does not carry that much weight. And if anyone thinks that their opinion carries that much weight for that many other people, that person is probably a bit of a narcissist. So it's ironic that the person who most publicly made these statements is known for being a bit of a narcissist. So I don't have any issue with that guy telling people to leave my church. Sure. If you are listening to him instead of the local church body that you are called to and that you're a covenant member of, if a pastor on the internet is going to cause you to question that, then we've got a bigger discipleship issue going on here anyway.
I think it's important for us to like say and know that like one aspect of us being a pastor and shepherding our people is to rightly call out evil in our culture when we see it and where it is. And I do think that if there is a cowardice in the pulpit, it is a fear of man that's afraid to call what is evil evil. And so without any equivocation, what happened on September 10th was evil. There was a lack of belief in the image of God in another human being that caused that person to murder that person. And that is evil and demonic. And like, there's no question about that. I do think, though, that the measure of a pastor is in their preaching of Christ crucified, the scriptures being faithfully presented within context, and God's people being shepherded. I mean, even taking that context of like a shepherd to its extreme, it's like when you look at shepherds, they're not concerned about how other shepherds are talking to their sheep. They're very much concerned about their sheep and the wolves that are attacking their sheep and the environment that their sheep are in. And to hear like another pastor tell another congregation that they don't pastor, that their pastor isn't godly enough or faithful enough, is bad. Like, I actually think that many of us should have said something on Sunday morning. The more I've like thought about it, because you said, in 2 days to be an oracle of the event, it's like it took us 2 weeks to even talk about this on our podcast.
Well, for the record, I tried to get everyone together the last 2 weeks, but they were all like, "Nah, Frank's out of town. We don't want to record." And I was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
forget
Thanks,
this.
guys."
Yeah, but I will say that Tim got messages from our congregation that are people who are hurting and affected by it. Therefore, we should absolutely talk about that at Lakeview. We should actually talk about this in our churches when our people are feeling this like weight of like, how do I process? How do I handle this? But when a pastor is calling other pastors cowards, that is bad, because
What's
those
ironic
pastors
about
should
that
know, but
is there's an argument that could be made that if for that guy to call other pastors cowards based on a non-biblical reason is actually a disqualifier for him.
yeah,
Like, you're sowing division in the church, and that's
Yeah, but
pretty
he doesn't
clearly-
pay attention to disqualifiers.
It's true. That's a fact.
I
But
think
I'm just saying it's just really ironic and interesting. It's like and like my point was, like you said, yes, it's possible that cowardice could be why you didn't. I can't imagine not talking about it to my congregation. But I think where maybe there was some difference of opinion is that I don't feel any obligation to post about the fact that I talked about it. Like, I don't need to prove it to anybody but my own people.
and I think that's
that's where I think the motivation of someone to say, if your pastor doesn't talk about it, leave. It's like, I think people wanted to be able to post that clip of their pastor saying something. And that's where it's just like,
I agree.
I mean, okay, I don't owe that to any other pastor. Like, you're not connected to me at all.
I think that we've created a new world where what you post on social media holds way more weight than it should, and way more value than it should.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous, and it's like
Part of it is the
there's
precedent this sets. I mean, I don't remember anybody calling for anything in other political violence that happened, particularly on the left side of the aisle. That's where it's like, I don't want to. This is not a precedent I want to be part of, where every time there's a political event, because my congregation is pretty diverse. So, this happened to touch more people on the right side of the aisle, but there's been recent political violence that touched the left side of the aisle that was horrific. Was it on camera? No, but that doesn't make it any less evil, right? So that's where I don't want to set the precedent of when this particular side has political violence done against it, I have to say something. And because I just think you're just going to go down a road where, like, when am I preaching? Like, from the Bible?
I mean, I think about the hurricanes that came last year through Florida. Tim and Andrew had to say something because it directly affected the people in their congregation and the people they care about from their congregation. If Jeff and Delmar had said something about it, that's nice. But like, their congregants, for the most part, are probably not affected by the hurricane that came through Florida that literally devastated.
Yeah, they're not ripping the drywall out of their houses.
Yeah.
20 minutes after
we had a
church.
kid get shot in cold blood in the bus loop at the high school, like executed right down the street from me. I said something about that.
Sure.
Because it was just as cold blooded, and it was on video, and a lot of the students at the school where I coach saw it. So that, yeah, I do feel more of an obligation to talk about that. It's difficult because, like Tim said, there are people who do feel a connection to a figure like this. And yet at the same time, I mean, it's like all the vigils that happen. You know, people were doing vigils around here and trying to do vigils. And I mean, a lot of us just felt real weird about it. Like, I don't have any connection to this person. It was just an attempt at people to feel like they're grieving and trying to do something with that emotion. And I get that. And I do think that's a place where we can step into that. But the idea that, like, if you don't do it this particular way, then you're a coward. Like, that line being that straight between those two things, I think is wrong.
It's almost, yeah, it's almost like the other side of how people are. I mean, this is maybe getting too much into the weeds here, but like, I've been seeing people criticize Erica Kirk for not grieving how they want her, how they
That's
want her
wild.
to. And I think that is just like gross. Like we always tell people, like, people grieve how they would need to grieve. And I think, like, to demand of pastors how to respond to this is also just like a level of, like, I don't know.
Maybe a better parallel is 5 years ago when companies were being boycotted because they didn't post a black square. That's what this is, just the other side. This is flip that around completely. It's virtue signaling. It's not actual outrage. It is, ooh, this is what everybody else is doing on my team, so I should do the same thing as well. And I have to make a statement. And oh, by the way, the internet exists, so I can just cobble together 3 or 4 other people's statements, and suddenly I have something original. It is exactly the same thing as the black square 5 years later.
Yeah. Todd Friel with Wretch TV had a really good take on this, and he's going to say it much better than I could, and maybe than we can collectively. I would encourage you to check it out, but he akined it to, this is the similar pressure that churches went through with COVID. Obviously, those are way different conversations, but one of the reasons there's so much pressure and one reason we feel it so much is because we still are hot. I mean, that's just a few years back where we were told, you have to do this. You have to comply. You have to do this. And now pastors are feeling the same kind of pressure again, and pastors are going to react. And back in the COVID times, it was, if you don't take a stand against it, you're not hardcore enough or whatever. And now it's that same energy coming back up. And what we're seeing is it's an energy that sometimes is just not cut with the grace of the gospel. I thought he had a really good take on that. We should have energy, but the energy should be cut with the grace of the gospel. It should also be cut with the truth of the gospel. And I think that's why this was a complex situation for pastors to move through, because it was in the same vein as that. There was no written guideline. This is how you handle COVID, but we had to handle it. There's no written guideline. This is how you handle this monumental assassination, but we have to handle it. And, to Tim's point earlier, yeah, we didn't have time to get prepared. Just like when COVID shut us down, it was like we were fine one week, next week the whole country shut down. We didn't have time to prepare. So I think having the network of pastors like this podcast, if you're listening in your own area, is so vital in situations even like this. So we're not just reacting.
I think that's really good. Pastors need to be with other pastors in community, not just people you follow online. because like we were able to talk to each other. We were able to text each other, and we know each other, and we know each other's hearts and intentions. Like these pastors online that like are saying these like inflammatory stuff about you and your church doesn't know who you are. And maybe they're right. Like maybe
none of them have ever had to discipline you. So it's
Yeah.
real easy to just think everything they say is great.
Yeah. Yeah. So be in the community. Hey, all of us said something to some degree in our churches, or there was something that was said to some degree in our services. But my question is, on the other side of this, what we're noticing is that there has been a surge of attendance in churches. There's been a growth. And some people are even calling this a revival. And I'm going to be careful of calling what's happening now a revival, but I do think that there is something happening where young people especially are coming back to church, and they have articulated that after September 10th is the reason why they're coming back to church. So what I want to ask you guys around the space is, what did you see at your church in the weekend and weeks after this event?
We've kind of seen the opposite. I had people reach out to me and say, "Hey, my church is turning Sunday morning into a funeral service for someone who's never stepped foot into our church." I'm assuming that's not the case at Safety Harbor. Am I right in what I perceive? And if so, is it okay if I kind of am a refugee there for a couple of weeks? So very different than that. And maybe that's, we are in the middle of kind of a diverse, when I say city, people think skyscrapers. That's not at all what Safety Harbor is, but it's a very, very purple area. And so we have not made any big political statements, and we have had people who are at more conservative churches
Coward.
say, we've had people at more conservative churches say, this is exhausting. We're going to step into that, into what you guys are doing for a season. So probably not the first answer that you wanted, but that's just what we've experienced. We've kind of experienced the opposite of that, not an influx of people coming because of that, but rather because we are not trying to politicize or align a church movement with a political movement.
Well, at Lakeview, things have been a bit different. The Sunday,
I'm shocked.
the Sunday after the Charlie Kirk assassination was the highest attended Sunday in the history of Lakeview Church, not non-holiday Sunday. And it wasn't even close. Like it was like by a long shot. There were probably dozens, plural, of first timers. So I didn't know if that was going to be a one-off or what. Then yesterday, we again saw double-digit first timers. And I think, Frank, you might have even talked to someone who said that we came as a direct result.
Yeah, I mean, this young lady came up to me with, actually it was two young ladies. One had been going since the beginning of our Exodus series, but the other one started coming 2 weeks ago. And I asked them, hey, how long have you been coming here? And one of them said, after Charlie Kirk's assassination, I felt really called to come to church. So I bought a Bible and I started coming to Lakeview, and I've loved being here. But what was interesting is my heart just melted because she was like, I don't know how to read my Bible. Like she said, in the pulpit, Tim said, we all know the story, but I don't know the story. And so I'm like, oh my goodness.
The pastor there needs to
way to be
the congregation a little bit.
I will fix that. Sorry,
this wasn't a diss towards Tim.
Kind
But,
rebuke.
But she was literally
I've
asking.
heard that rebuke. I've received
If
it.
your pastor says you know this story, leave that church.
She was literally saying, like, she's like, how can I learn to read my Bible more?
It's great.
And I'm like, I wish we had more people asking that question. Like, it was so sweet.
This is off topic
Yeah.
and off of our notes, but this is a wonderful thing that people are coming to church, and we have an opportunity that we're going to need to steward. Absolutely. But also to anyone who thinks that, the conservative movement is, going to align us with the kingdom of God, this should be a red flashing light that says, not the case. Just because someone votes the way that you do does not mean that they have the same spiritual priorities that you do. And so a political conservative resurgence is not the same as a revival. And I'm not saying that this isn't how revivals can be started. God can absolutely use something like this. But anyone who is celebrating, hey, we have more seats in the Senate or the Congress than we used to, God is at work at our country, they are not the same things, because someone who is obviously moved by something happening politically that is a movement towards the right side of the aisle, who doesn't know Sunday school stories or basics on how to read their Bible, that's not a win. I'd much rather have someone vote different than me and know how to read their Bible and know God's word and be a true disciple of Jesus who comes to a different conclusion than me politically.
But I'm good. Like, if they're wanting to get into the word and come to church,
Absolutely.
like, I'm not going to be like,
Heck
hey,
yes.
no, you don't
Heck
know your
yeah.
Bible well enough.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the idea that, hey, we've got all these young conservatives coming to church for the first time. Well, someone who is conservative and isn't going to church is a missed mark.
Sure.
That's not something that should be celebrated. Hey,
but we celebrate them coming.
We celebrate them coming to church 1,000%.
Okay.
But we don't celebrate that, the country is 2 clicks more conservative than it was 5 years ago, because if those people are not being discipled in a church, who cares how they vote?
I think I think you're saying that, like, we should be more excited about the fact that there is a resurgence of interest in faith,
yes,
than necessarily a movement politically.
Yes, kingdoms fall. I'm not even a little bit concerned. I mean, that's not true. Again, that part of Andrew's brain that is very political when he's not following Jesus as closely as he should is very concerned. But I want to be way more concerned about people learning to study the Bible for themselves, even if that means they come to different real world applications than I have in my head as a white conservative evangelical.
Yeah, honestly, I've seen so many takes on both sides of the spectrum. There's a guy I'm friends with on Facebook, and he is a minister, very progressive. He's actually a universalist, so we can put him whatever camp you want to put him in. And he was expressing some outrage that the Charlie Kirk thing pushed Christians into conservative churches, and now the gospel is being hitched to the conservative message, to which I think my mind goes back to that scripture. Some men preach the gospel out of selfish ambition, and some preach it the right way.
Yep.
I don't care. I just want people to hear the gospel. I don't care if it's in a conservative church, if it is a biblically faithful, less conservative church. I just want people to hear the gospel. And I think you shouldn't be angry that people are hearing the gospel. And if his removal of Charlie Kirk, the assassination, sovereignty, all of that bundled into one, if that is going to lead a lot of people and be the conduit and the means by which people come to church and hear the gospel, or even better yet, by which church folks finally take the gospel outside of church into their daily lives and spread the gospel, that should be what we were talking about every week. We should be celebrating that.
Yeah, we haven't really seen, I would say, a surge. We had a group of like 4 college students show up, I think, the week before this happened. And they've continued to come, and a couple of them are getting baptized, which is pretty cool. But I mean, our church is seeing some growth right now, but we just for us, it's a lot of what Andrew said. There's a lot of like transients, where people come for a little while and then you don't see them for a while. It's that whole thing in a small church of like, if everybody came on the same week, it'd be like 100 people, but normally it's around 40 or 50. So we haven't seen like a big surge. And so, I don't know if I'm supposed to feel bad about that or like I'm doing something wrong, but it's just the reality. And I don't mean from you guys. I just mean from like the stuff I see online is like, there's this huge movement of people, and I just don't live in an area where there's a lot of conservative young people. Most of the young people I talk to are like pretty checked out on politics. So a lot of them, again, they knew who Kirk was, but they didn't connect it to like coming to church or conservative values necessarily. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks. But for us, it's been just kind of, other than talking about a horrible assassination, it's been business as usual.
What's one concrete way for people who are listening to this that may have seen an uptick in their attendance? What is one way this week for them to steward the moment?
Sit with your people, have conversations with the people, take the time to be with them. I know anytime there's an uptick in church attendance, we want to talk about assimilation and, hey, planning center is going to give me this person's phone number, and on this visit they're going to get this email, and on this visit they're going to get a handwritten postcard, or whatever the assimilation process that you have right now. I don't think now is the time that anybody cares about the systems you have in place. They care about the time that they're going to get with you as a pastor or a church leader. So take time to sit with somebody in the lobby and have a cup of coffee, or if you have a fellowship hall after church food experience like we do here, sit at a different table and sit with people and listen to them and talk with them, tell them your story, the church's story. Now is the time when you actually get to build personal relationships. So lean into that. Don't just depend on a system that you may or may not have in place.
But I wouldn't say you have to neglect the system.
No.
If it's a good system that works. So I tried to make I call it making my rounds. I tried to make my rounds yesterday when I saw the amount of new people, and I let them know, hey, if you give us your info, I personally will be reaching out to you within the next day or two. So that way they knew, if you have any questions, I get church is about to start in 3 minutes. We're not gonna have a ton of time to talk right now. And after church, it's kind of crazy. But if you'd like to chat, just scan the QR code, fill this out, and I will reach out to you within the next day or two to have that conversation, that personal touch, like Andrew was saying. But I also, that's nothing different than what I would normally do. So I don't know that I'm having to change much right now, because we do have what I would consider to be a pretty good system in place, where I do want to make sure people are getting contacted within the first 24 hours or so. I'm not saying now is the time to promote your system, but if you have a good one that's working, you don't have to abandon that. But if you do find other opportunities to connect on a more personal level, I'm with Andrew on this. By all means, take advantage of that.
If you don't have a good system, leave your church. No, I would just say, for me, I agree with Andrew about I was going to say, whatever systems you have, make sure that there's personal touches in the system. Don't make it like a robot. But with the personal invites to, easy things, like right after this, I'm going to go have coffee with somebody. And I think one of the things, I'm preaching through Proverbs right now, and the idea of not being wise in your own eyes, I think, is really important here. And I think some of that is allowing yourself to be vulnerable to your people. I am not an expert. I don't have a degree in poli-sci, and so I am not going to come in here and try to convince you. I think there's a temptation, and I'm speaking for me, there's a temptation to be seen as an expert, to be seen as like a sage. And the reality is I'm not. And so I think one of the things I said to my congregation when we did address this issue the week after it happened was, hey, look, I know other things have happened and we didn't say anything about it because I am not perfect and I'm not totally consistent, and neither are you. I am inconsistent. I don't see everything like I should. And so the reality is, yes, I'm saying something about this horrible murder that happened, and you might be thinking I didn't say something about another one that happened, and you're right, because I can't do everything. I'm just a person. So I think, being open about that with your people, because a lot of people like to put us on unreasonable pedestals, and that's where some of this pressure comes from. Like, you're supposed to be, the most brave, articulate, smart, like well-informed person who doesn't also have kids and a family and all kinds of other stuff going on just like they do. And so I think just like being vulnerable about that and being open with people that, hey, I literally don't know everything. I think has been the most helpful for me, in people seeing in people not hopefully putting me on some weird like clergy pedestal that I don't belong on.
Yeah, I would also say right now our church, just like y'all's, many of y'all's, has seen a pretty big uptick of new people. Matter of fact, we had our new interest meeting yesterday, and it was filled with people I didn't know any of them's names, I don't think, which was a blessing. But that also means it's really easy for them to fall through the cracks if we don't take our pastoral due diligence. This is not just a pastor issue. This is a full elder care team issue. So I would make sure that you have some kind of system in place where you're doing some follow-ups with your new people who are there. And honestly, even your follow-ups with the people who this has affected. Right now, I'm talking with the pastor at my church about doing a coffee with the pastor sign up in the lobby. Hey, if you really want to talk with the pastor, sign up. You can have one-on-one time at the local coffee shop with him. And here's the thing. A lot of church parishioners are not going to take you up with that, but some of them will. And that will mean a lot. And beyond that, even the ones who don't take you up on that, subconsciously, it does help them know that, guess what? Our pastor is accessible. He's accessible in times of need. I can always grab coffee with him. So on the whole, I would just sit down and have a conversation, even if it's just a 10, 20-minute conversation with your own self. What am I doing to make sure these new people do not fall through the cracks? And then come away with an action plan and a follow-up and tell the people who need to know and go forward with it.
Luke 13, I think 13 or 14, but there's a passage where Jesus talks about this tower where like a number of people died. And Jesus basically turned it back on the people that were alive and said, now is the time for you to repent and believe. And I think that these type of like national tragedies have a way of making us think about eternal things. And so people might be coming to our churches who are lost or who are hurting or who are confused. Now is the time to remind your team, whether it's your staff or your volunteers, your hospitality team, whoever. It's like, when we see these strangers who are coming to our door, don't just like treat it as business as usual. Like, these are people who need to hear and know about the good news of who Jesus is and what he's done. And that even through Christ, there's a hope in the dark, evil world that we live in. So I think we've been kind of saying it over and over again. You can have good systems, you can have good workflows, you can have good PCO, but now is the time to be human and actually love the people God is bringing to you. I think before we wrap this up, and I want to give some like quick high level thoughts about how we should interact for the rest of this, for the next few Sundays. We have a Facebook group. If you go to Facebook and search for Practically Pastoring, you can find us. There's been a lot of good questions and discussions on there. And I remember like the week of going into that Sunday after Charlie Kirk passed away, someone even said, I feel like I should rewrite my entire sermon for Sunday. And there was a little bit of dialogue around that discussion, whether or not that was a wise choice or not. You shouldn't be doing ministry alone, nor should you base your ministry fidelity on what some pastor who doesn't know your name says online. A Facebook group like Practically Pastoring can help you find that community. Go on Facebook, look up Practically Pastoring. We hope to see you there. All right, guys, last thing, what are some guardrails or ways to think about the next couple of weeks of ministry as we are living in this post-September 10th world? What are some guardrails?
I think for me, it's just continuing to do your own time with God's presence. And, we've talked about John Mark Comer's idea, which is probably a Dallas Willard idea of a non-anxious presence. And I think that's pretty helpful.
I would say continue to call evil with clarity, not theatrics or clickbait.
Yeah, I would just also say, well, continue to keep the gospel central. Continue letting the text lead you more than the culture.
One of the things that we say here is pastor the church you have, not the church that you want. I would say to pastor the church that you have, and don't pastor churches that you don't have. And also don't let someone who isn't the pastor at your church pastor your church. So don't shame pastors that made different calls than you've made in this situation, and don't compare yourself to other churches. Be faithful in what God has called you to do, where God has called you to do it, and trust that other pastors are doing the same where God has called them to serve.
Measure your faithfulness to your fidelity to God's word, to prayer, and to the shepherding of the people God has entrusted you with. That has been the measure for the past 2,000 years, and there's no reason to change that now. So with that being said, we're glad that you joined us today. We'll be here next week. Hopefully it'll be a little bit lighter of a show, but with that being said, see you next week.